The camera lights were blinding, reflecting off the beads of sweat on my cousin Mark's forehead. He was flashing his big, practiced smile for the local news anchor, holding up a giant novelty check for $500,000. It was the centerpiece of the evening news segment, Hometown Hero. And today, he was the hero. He was telling some sob story about how he'd used the money to help our family, maybe put a down payment on a house for his long-suffering parents. The anchor nodded along, her expression dripping with sympathy. The small studio audience, mostly made up of his friends and my cheering aunt and uncle, applauded on cue. They were all so proud of him, the golden boy who finally made it big. I watched the whole scene unfold on a monitor from a small, dark room backstage, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm in my chest. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. All I felt was a cold, quiet calm. He had no idea that the check in his hands was a prop. The interview was a complete fabrication, and the two men in sharp, dark suits walking onto the set weren't from the lottery commission. They were detectives, and I had their full attention. The anchor, who was in on the whole thing, kept a perfect smile on her face as she turned to the camera. "Well, Mark," she said, her voice suddenly laced with ice, "it seems your story has just taken an unexpected turn." Mark's smile faltered, his eyes darting from the anchor to the approaching men. He didn't understand. None of them did. They thought this was his moment of triumph, the peak of his life. In reality, it was the beginning of his end, broadcast live for the entire city to see. You're probably wondering why I would orchestrate such a cruel and public humiliation for my own flesh and blood. To understand that, you have to understand that this wasn't just about a lottery ticket. It was about a debt that had been compounding for 25 years, and I was finally here to collect. From as far back as I can remember, my life was defined by my relationship with my cousin, Mark. Our family wasn't large, but it revolved around two sons, my Aunt Carol and Uncle David, his parents. And in their solar system, Mark was the planet everyone orbited, while I was just a forgotten moon, useful only for deflecting asteroids. Mark was the golden child. If he broke a lamp, it was because he had a boisterous spirit. If he failed a test, it was because the teacher didn't understand his creative genius. He was charming, handsome, and lazy, a combination that my aunt and uncle mistook for untapped potential. I, on the other hand, was the scapegoat. I was quiet, responsible, and practical. In their eyes, that didn't make me virtuous. It made me useful. It meant I could carry the burdens Mark was too sensitive to bear. When I was 16, I worked all summer bagging groceries to save up $800. It was for a down payment on a beat-up old sedan, my first taste of freedom. The same week I hit my goal, Mark borrowed his dad's expensive acoustic guitar to impress a girl and ended up smashing it against a wall at a party. I'll never forget my Aunt Carol sitting me down at our kitchen table, her eyes welling up with tears. She didn't talk to Mark about his recklessness. She talked to me about my savings. "You're so good with money, sweetie," she cooed. "Mark is just devastated. Having to pay for this would crush his spirit." She didn't ask. She expected. I handed over my entire summer's earnings. Mark didn't even thank me. 2 days later, I overheard him complaining to a friend that his dad was being unfair by not buying him a brand new guitar immediately. This was the pattern. He would create the mess, and I would be tasked with cleaning it up, emotionally and financially. When he was caught cheating on his exams in high school, I was the one who had to tutor him for hours on end, sacrificing my own studies because Mark has to pass to keep his spot on the football team. When he got a speeding ticket in his dad's car, I was the one who had to take the blame because he already had too many points on his license. My role was to be invisible, to absorb every problem, and to ensure the golden boy's path was always smooth and clear. Every sacrifice I made wasn't seen as a gift, it was seen as my duty. So when he stole that lottery ticket, he probably thought it was just business as usual. He had been stealing my time, my money, and my future for years. This time, however, was different. This time, I was done paying his debts. Years passed, but the roles stayed the same. By the time I was 28, I was working as an overnight stalker at a massive distribution warehouse on the edge of town. It was physically demanding, anonymous work, but it paid just enough for me to afford my tiny one-bedroom apartment and my bills. It was my sanctuary, a quiet space where I wasn't anyone's scapegoat or personal bank. The calls still came, of course. My aunt would phone, her voice syrupy sweet, asking if I could lend Mark a couple $100 to fix his car, which always seemed to be broken. Or Mark himself would text, needing a ride across town at 2 a.m. because he was stuck. I usually gave in, not out of love, but out of a deep, ingrained exhaustion. It was easier to say yes than to deal with the guilt trips and drama that came with saying no. The one person who mattered, the only one who ever saw me for who I was my grandmother. She was my rock. But recently, she'd gotten sick. A series of health complications left her with a mountain of medical bills that her fixed income and basic insurance couldn't cover. Seeing her worry about money instead of focusing on her recovery was breaking my heart. My dream wasn't flashy. I didn't want a sports car or a mansion. I dreamed of walking into that hospital billing office and paying off every single one of her debts. I wanted to give her peace. That was my $500,000 dream. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, after a grueling 12-hour shift, I stopped at a small convenience store to pick up my grandmother's prescriptions. A bright sign in the window advertised the local lottery jackpot, a life-changing $500,000. I'd always called the lottery a tax on people who were bad at math. But standing there, bone-tired and weighed down by a feeling of helplessness, I thought about my grandma. On a whim, I pulled a crumpled $5 bill from my pocket and bought a single ticket. I didn't even use the quick pick option. I carefully filled in the bubbles with significant numbers. My grandma's birthday, my birthday, the year she moved into her house. I slipped the ticket into my wallet, right behind a faded photo of her. It felt like a foolish, desperate prayer, a secret between me and the universe. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope that wasn't attached to anyone else's needs but my own. The night of the drawing, I was so tired I almost forgot I'd even bought the ticket. I was eating a bowl of cereal for dinner, watching the late local news, when the winning numbers flashed on the screen. Idly, I pulled the ticket from my wallet. I checked the first number. It matched. A little jolt went through me. The second number matched. My heart started to thump against my ribs. The third, the fourth, the fifth. A perfect match. I stared at the ticket, then at the screen. I did it 3 more times. My hands started to shake. A wild, hysterical laugh bubbled up out of my chest. I had won. $500,000. The first and only thought in my head was my grandmother. I could finally give her the peace of mind she deserved. My fingers fumbled as I dialed her number. When she answered, I blurted it all out in a rush of breathless, happy tears. She gasped, her voice filled with pure, unselfish joy for me. "Oh, my dear boy, that's wonderful," she cried. But in the background, I heard another voice, sharp and inquisitive. It was my Aunt Carol. "What is it? What's happened?" she demanded. In her excitement, my grandmother relayed the news. There was a pause on the line. Then Aunt Carol's voice came through, dripping with a strange, sugary intensity. "A lottery winner? In our own family? That's a miracle." The way she said "our family" sent a chill down my spine. Before I could even process what was happening, my tiny apartment was filled with them. Aunt Carol, Uncle David, and Mark arrived with a cheap bottle of champagne, insisting on a celebration. They didn't celebrate me, they celebrated the money. "Mark, you can finally get a reliable car," my uncle boomed, clapping him on the back. "And we can finally fix this leaky roof," my aunt added, already spending my winnings in her head. They never once asked me what my plans were. When I tried to mention my grandmother, Aunt Carol waved her hand dismissively. Of course, we'll take care of her. There's more than enough to go around." Mark was strangely quiet the whole time, just watching me with an unreadable expression. As they left, he pulled me into a brief, awkward hug. "Seriously, man. Congratulations," he muttered into my shoulder. The next morning, I woke up with a knot of dread in my stomach. I went to my wallet to look at the ticket, to confirm it was all real. But it was gone. The slot behind my grandma's picture was empty. And I knew. I knew with absolute certainty. Mark's hug wasn't a celebration, it was a theft. For a few seconds, I just stood in my apartment, the silence buzzing in my ears. The shock was a physical thing, a cold weight in my gut. Then, rage took over. It was a pure, white-hot fury I hadn't felt in years. I didn't call. I didn't text. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to my aunt and uncle's house, breaking every speed limit. I found Mark in the driveway, polishing his beat-up car with a smug look on his face. I slammed my car door and marched right up to him. "Where is it?" I demanded, my voice low and shaking. "Give it back to me, Mark." He looked up, feigning confusion. "Whoa, take it easy. What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb with me," I snarled. "The ticket. My lottery ticket. You took it out of my wallet last night." His face hardened, and he immediately shifted into the role he played best, the victim. "You're crazy," he said, taking a step back. "Why would I do that?" He raised his voice, loud enough for his parents to hear inside. "Mom! Dad! You need to hear this. He's accusing me of stealing from him." My aunt and uncle rushed out onto the porch, their faces etched with concern that instantly turned to steel when they looked at me. "What is the meaning of this?" Aunt Carol demanded, her hands on her hips. Mark, his voice cracking with fake emotion, told them my crazy accusation. My aunt's gaze was like ice. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with indignation. "You come to our home after we welcomed you and you accuse your cousin, your family, of being a common thief?" Uncle David stepped forward, using a calm, patronizing tone that was somehow worse than my aunt's anger. "Son, let's be rational," he said. "Are you absolutely sure you won? You were tired. It was late. It's easy to misread the numbers." "I know what I saw," I insisted, my voice desperate. "It's gone. And he was the last one near me." "You're being paranoid," Aunt Carol snapped. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic. You probably just misplaced it and now you need someone to blame. You owe Mark an apology for this vicious lie." I stood there, surrounded. They had already formed a wall around him, protecting their golden boy. They weren't just denying the truth. They were actively rewriting it, painting me as unstable, malicious, and delusional. The theft of the ticket was one thing. But this united, calculated effort to make me believe I was losing my mind, that was the deeper betrayal. I was the villain. He was the victim. And in their eyes, that was the end of the story. For a week, I lived in a gray fog. I went to work. I came home. I barely ate. I tore my apartment apart a dozen times, searching for the ticket in places I knew it wouldn't be. It was a desperate ritual to fight off the voice in my head, their voice, that whispered I was crazy, that I had imagined the whole thing. My family didn't call. It was a silence so profound it felt like a verdict. I had been judged and found guilty of questioning the family narrative. My phone would light up with notifications, not for me, but about them. My aunt was posting on social media, photos of her and Mark with captions like, "Family is everything," and "so blessed." It was a public performance of their unity against me. The fog finally lifted one evening while I was sitting in a cheap diner, trying to stomach a meal before my shift. The TV above the counter was tuned to the local news. And then I saw him. It was Mark, standing in front of the State Lottery Commission building, smiling for the cameras. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Local warehouse worker claims $500,000 prize." He was holding the ticket. My ticket. I could see the specific creases on it from where it had been folded in my wallet. Any trace of self-doubt I had vanished, burned away by the sight. He was giving an interview, a masterful performance of humility and grace. "I just bought it on a whim, you know. I felt like I needed a little luck," he said, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "The first people I thought of were my parents. They've sacrificed so much for me, and now I can finally give something back." He choked up a little, wiping a fake tear from his eye. The reporter ate it up. He was the perfect local boy makes good story. He was everything they wanted him to be: grateful, selfless, and deserving. He was a thief and a brilliant liar. My blood didn't boil. It turned to ice. As I watched him bask in the glory of his crime, celebrated by the entire city, something inside me shifted permanently. The pain was still there, but it had crystallized into a single cold purpose. They had ostracized me. They had gaslighted me, and now they were publicly celebrating their victory over me. They assumed I would just accept my role as the crazy, jealous cousin and fade away. They thought they had buried me. They didn't realize they had just planted a seed. Sitting in that diner, I made a quiet vow. I would get my money back. But that was no longer the main goal. The real prize would be watching their perfect world, built on my suffering, burned to the ground. The grief and rage settled into something far more dangerous: patience. My job at the warehouse, once a symbol of my stagnant life, became my training ground. For 12 hours a night, I performed repetitive, methodical tasks, and with each box I lifted, my mind grew clearer. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was building a case. I started by breaking the problem down into its simplest parts. What did I have? I had the truth. But the truth is useless without proof. So, where was the proof? My first stop was the convenience store. I went during a quiet afternoon and found the same young clerk working the counter. I asked him if he remembered me from the previous week. He shrugged, but I pressed on. "I bought a lottery ticket," I said calmly. "The $500,000 winner. I played a set of specific numbers, all birthdays." I recited them from memory. My grandma's, mine, the year she bought her house. His eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh yeah, the birthday guy. I remember that." "You don't see that too often." That was step 1. Step 2 was harder. I explained that the ticket had been stolen and that I desperately needed to prove I was the one who purchased it. I asked about the security cameras. The clerk called the owner, who was immediately reluctant, talking about privacy and company policy. It was a dead end until I pulled out my wallet. I had $200 in cash, meant for my rent. I put it on the counter. "For the trouble," I said. "And for a copy of the footage from that day." Money talks. An hour later, I walked out with a USB drive. On it was a crystal clear video of me, at that counter, at that time, filling out the slip and paying for what was now officially Mark's winning ticket. That night, a thought struck me. When I bought the ticket, I had a fleeting, surreal feeling, as if I were in a dream. What do people do in moments like that? They take a picture. I grabbed my phone, my heart hammering, and scrolled back through my photo gallery to that day. And there it was. A slightly blurry but undeniable photo of the ticket resting on my car's passenger seat. The numbers were clear. The unique serial number at the bottom was legible, and the photo's metadata was a digital fingerprint, the exact time, date, and GPS coordinates of the convenience store. I had the footage, and I had the photo. It was my word against theirs, but my word now had receipts. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Mark and his family thought they were playing checkers. I was about to start playing chess. With the evidence secured on a new USB drive, I felt a shift in the air. The power was no longer entirely in their hands. My next stop wasn't my aunt's house. It was the city police headquarters. I sat across from a tired-looking detective in the fraud division. a man who looked like he'd seen every lie imaginable. I didn't get emotional. I didn't raise my voice. I calmly presented my case. I played the security footage on a small laptop. I showed him the time-stamped photo from my phone, pointing out how the ticket's serial number in my photo matched the one visible in the news broadcast of Mark holding it. I explained the family history, the gaslighting, the complete ostracization. He listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Lottery fraud is a Class B felony," he said, his voice flat. "And this," he tapped my laptop screen, "is some of the cleanest preliminary evidence I've ever seen." He told me they could issue a warrant and pick Mark up quietly. But I shook my head. "Quietly isn't good enough," I said. "He didn't just steal from me. He and his family assassinated my character. They made me out to be a liar and a lunatic to everyone we know. I don't just want the money back. I want my name back." The detective studied me for a long moment, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. That afternoon, I made a call. I found the name of the news anchor who had interviewed Mark, Brenda Vance. I pitched her the story of a lifetime. "You interviewed the hometown hero lottery winner," I said. "I'm his cousin, the one he actually stole the ticket from. I have proof, and the police are involved. How would you like the exclusive story of his downfall, including a live, on-air arrest?" There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by the unmistakable sound of pure, unadulterated ambition. "Tell me everything," she said. The following week was a whirlwind of secret planning between me, Detective Miller, and Brenda's news team. The station, hungry for a viral story, was more than happy to cooperate. They invited Mark back for a follow-up segment called A Hero's Journey, luring him with more attention and a chance to talk about his wise investments. Mark, arrogant and unsuspecting, eagerly accepted. The stage was set. The cameras were ready. The trap was laid. He thought he was coming back for another victory lap. He had no idea he was walking onto the set of his own public execution, and I was the executive producer. I stood in the cold, dark quiet of the control room, a wall of monitors in front of me. It was like watching a dozen different versions of the same lie. On one screen, there was a close-up of Mark's face, smug and beaded with sweat under the hot lights. He was wearing a new designer watch. I made a mental note to include that in the list of assets to be seized. On another screen, a wide shot showed the whole set, a cheerful, brightly lit stage for a dark little play. A third monitor was trained on the small studio audience, where my Aunt Carol and Uncle David sat in the front row, beaming. My aunt clutched a tissue in her hand, already prepared to weep with pride for her precious son. From my godlike vantage point, I could see every angle, every lie, every clueless smile. Brenda Vance was a true professional. Her voice was warm, her questions gentle, lulling Mark into a state of perfect self-satisfaction. "So, Mark," she began, "everyone wants to know, what's the first big thing you did with the money?" Mark laughed, a rehearsed, charming sound. "Honestly, Brenda, the first thing I did was take my parents out for a nice dinner. After that, it's all about investing wisely. You can't just be frivolous with a blessing like this." He was so convincing. He leaned into the microphone, the picture of responsibility. "This money isn't just for me. It's for my family's future. It's about security." My aunt and uncle nodded along, their faces masks of pure adoration. They were so proud of the man he was pretending to be. Brenda then asked him about rumors of starting a new business. Mark's chest puffed out. "We're looking into it," he said grandly. "I've always wanted to give back to this community, and now I finally have the means." I glanced at the monitor showing the wings of the stage. Detective Miller caught my eye from the shadows and gave me a single, slow nod. It was time. The producer's voice crackled in my headset. "Cue Brenda! On my mark!" Brenda's smile never wavered, but her eyes turned to flint. She let Mark finish his sentence, giving him just enough rope. Then she pulled it tight. "That's a truly inspiring sentiment, Mark," she said, her voice dropping into a serious, journalistic tone. "But speaking of your win, we have some breaking news on that story. It seems there's another claimant to your prize." Mark's confident posture stiffened. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and alarm. He had no idea what was coming. The confident mask on Mark's face shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Another claimant?" he stammered, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a choke. That's impossible. A prank?" Brenda Vance's expression was deadly serious. She looked past him, directly into the camera, as if addressing the entire city. "The claimant is your cousin," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "He alleges you stole this winning ticket from him the night you found out he'd won. We've obtained security footage of him purchasing the ticket, and more importantly, a time-stamped photograph of the ticket in his possession hours before the drawing." On the large monitor behind Mark's head, my photo of the ticket flashed up, the numbers and serial codes stark and clear for everyone to see. Mark's face went from pale to ghostly white. "No, he's a liar. He's always been jealous. He's making it all up," he yelled, his voice cracking. He was flailing, his confident persona completely gone, replaced by the cornered animal he truly was. As he babbled his denials, Detective Miller and his partner stepped out from the wings, their movements calm and deliberate. The audience gasped. My aunt and uncle shot to their feet. The detectives didn't run. They walked with an unhurried purpose that was far more terrifying. "Mark," Detective Miller said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "We need to talk to you about lottery fraud." Mark looked wildly from the detective to his parents in the audience, his eyes begging for them to save him, just like they always had. "Mom! Dad! Do something!" he shrieked. But they were frozen, their faces a canvas of horror and disbelief. My aunt let out a gut-wrenching sob that was swallowed by the cavernous silence of the studio. The moment was surreal. The hero was being unmasked as the villain on live television. Then came the sound that I had been waiting to hear for what felt like my entire life. It was the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs closing around Mark's wrists. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of the end of his lies. As they led him away, a weeping, pathetic mess, he was no longer the golden child. He was just a criminal. The show cut to a chaotic commercial break. I walked out of the control room, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. I passed my aunt and uncle, who stood there like statues in the wreckage of their world. My aunt looked at me, her face streaked with tears, her mouth opening and closing with nothing to say. I didn't slow down. I didn't offer a word of comfort or condemnation. I just met her gaze, held it for a single, long second, and then walked out of the building into the cool, clean air of freedom. The weeks that followed the arrest were a strange blur. The story went viral. "Hometown hero to hometown zero," one headline blared. Mark was out on bail, facing a slew of felony charges, and my family name was now synonymous with scandal. The Lottery Commission, after a swift investigation using the evidence from the police, formally disqualified Mark's claim and declared me the rightful winner. The money, a staggering sum even after taxes, was wired into a new bank account that I opened at a bank where no one knew my name. I felt like I could finally breathe. I spent a day moving my few possessions out of my tiny apartment. I didn't need a sanctuary from my family anymore. A week later, I was standing on a dusty street downtown with a real estate agent, looking at an old brick-faced auto garage that had been sitting vacant for years. It was perfect. This was where I would start the small engine repair shop I'd dreamed of since I was a kid, a dream I'd buried under years of duty and sacrifice. As I was discussing the inspection with the agent, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. My Aunt Carol and Uncle David got out. They looked like ghosts. The shame had hollowed them out, aged them a decade in a month. They approached me hesitantly. We just want to talk, my uncle started, his voice gravelly. My aunt wrung her hands, her eyes red-rimmed. We are so sorry, she whispered. We were wrong. We were so wrong. We love him so much. We were blind. She looked up at me, her face a mess of desperation. But he's your cousin. He's blood. Please, you can't let him go to prison. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. This is destroying our family. I listened to their whole pathetic speech without interruption. When they finished, a profound silence hung in the air. Blind? I finally said, my voice quiet and even. You weren't blind. You just chose what to see. You've been doing it my whole life. He was your precious project, and I was just a resource to be used for his benefit. A tool. That's not true, my aunt began. Isn't it? I cut her off, my voice like ice. You didn't create a son. You created a liability. You shielded him from every consequence, and now the one consequence you can't fix is about to land on him. That is not my fault. That is your life's work. But we're your family, she cried. No, I said, the word hanging between us with absolute finality. Family is a bond built on love and respect, not exploitation. You broke that bond every time you chose him over me. Mark is a thief, and you are the people who taught him he could get away with it. I gestured to the garage behind me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm about to buy this building. I'm investing in my future. It's time you started dealing with yours. I turned my back on them and walked toward the agent, leaving them standing alone on the curb with the ruins of the world they had built.